Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Norris, and I'm one of the founders of Jamesbeck, which is a boutique executive search firm focused exclusively on the investment management industry. And I'm here today with Michael Hepner, who I've known for a number of years. He's a very accomplished individual. He has founded his own firm called GK Training that helps firms and individuals with their communications. He advises presidential candidates, which is quite fancy. And he's also worked at Columbia Business School, working with their MBA and PhD programs. Michael has worked with everybody at Jamesbeck, Michael and his team, helping us with our communications. And we've also referred to him to a number of clients who've really enjoyed his training and what he brings to bear across his platform. I would say for me, his training was a huge game changer, and I loved working with him, and he brought to the table incredible insights that I hadn't even known I needed to improve upon. Today, Michael is helping us to think about what I'm finding is one of the new challenges in this new norm, which is communicating over VC. Sure, that in and of itself is difficult, but communicating over VC when you've got this Hollywood Squares notion of maybe 4 to 8 people who are communicating over the web, and that's really challenging. And so I would like to start today to discuss about how you find ways to overcome the difficulties in that scenario.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for setting this up. I'm hopeful that we can be quite helpful to people in a short amount of time. To get right to your question, there's a few things that just can't be substituted. So one of the simple things is preparing. Now, I know everyone says, okay, thanks, really genius piece of advice, or I should prepare? No way. But what I mean by that is that you want to prepare, in particular, any kind of transitions. So what I often use for people as a metaphor is, everyone knows this. If you're watching a relay race, everyone knows it's not the team with the fastest runners that wins the race. It's the team that has the cleanest handoffs of the baton. So if there are moments that you really do want to make sure, okay, now we're going to hand it off to Melissa and she's going to talk about whatever, or if this topic comes up, we really want to involve Stuart because he's going to have the best stuff to say on that. You want to make sure you prepare for those transitions because that's often when things kind of fall apart. So that's one concept, preparing for transitions. Another is just the very simple fact of where to look. I know that sounds like a silly thing, but you have all these video boxes floating around and you're thinking like, who's talking? Who am I looking at? It's a little bit of a learned skill, but to the extent that when you're talking, especially if there's a lot of different videos, that you're actually looking right there where the camera for the computer is. Because in remote communication, believe it or not, that's the same thing as making eye contact. A metaphor for this is if you watch the nightly news, the news broadcaster looks right into the camera. Because what they're trying to do is convey this sense that I am speaking just to you. I'm the trusted voice sharing with you the important information you need to know. If you watch a news broadcaster and they're saying, I want to tell you about what's happening in the world right now regarding the coronavirus pandemic, you don't feel as though they're actually talking to you, and it's harder to trust them. So to the extent when you are speaking, if you can actually focus on the camera, it can make a big difference.
What do you feel about having somebody who launches off as the narrator, if you will, kind of the conductor of the meeting? Because I recently had a pitch and I kind of took that stance as the point person to start the meeting and say, look, we're going to try to attempt to not talk over one another during this meeting. We've assigned different people, different topics to cover, just to kind of lay the groundwork. So we are kind of obviating the need for people to talk over one another.
I think it's a great idea. And I think it's a great idea particularly now because we have this very strange moment where everyone starts conference calls, video, audio conference calls, and inevitably someone says, how's it going? Or how are you? Well, it's a pretty safe bet right now that whoever you're talking to is not necessarily good, and that how things are going is not necessarily good right now. But yet, as a society, we're so accustomed to responding reflexively to that question, almost as though it's a greeting, like, hi, how's it going? We say, good, or how are you? Good. And even that moment, a tiny bit of inauthenticity actually can set the call up in not the best direction. So the idea that someone grabs hold right away of the reins to state what we're going to do is fantastic. And I really encourage you to do that. And I would even go so far as that if you feel as though the folks you're talking to may want to actually talk a little bit about all the chaos and concerns and even like health impacts of what's happening, that might be a good use of time to say, look, before we get to the agenda and to remind you there's 3 key points we have to talk about. Before we do that, I want to just take 2 minutes and just go around and make sure everyone is doing okay regarding. Now, don't just open it up, but regarding, and make it specific. Your work from home situation or your immediate safety right now. So you're giving very clear parameters to the conversation. Now, alternatively, let's say you think, you know what, I'm sure everyone has their own kind of coronavirus moment happening right now. Let's not get into that because this is a business call that's only scheduled for 20 minutes. Let's just cut right to it. Then it's even more important for you to grab the reins and you can acknowledge the situation we find ourselves in and also be able to still get right to business. So you could go either way with it, but the idea of having a firm hand on the rudder right at the top, it cannot be overstated.
It's an odd thing because you feel like you're dictating the course of the meeting versus letting it organically flow, but actually it was well received. So and it really set us up to be more kind of seamless and not talking over one another, which was helpful.
Yeah.
My next question is around how do you successfully interject when somebody's talking? So let's say you're in a pitch situation, you ask a question, the person's answering it, or they're giving a diatribe over something, and you want to interject to kind of hone in on one thing they said, or to give a kind of a bit of information that will show that you understand what they're talking about. How do you do that successfully without being rude and talking over them?
Yeah, sure. There's actually 2 animal archetypes we teach when I teach this kind of programming for people. And the 2 archetypes are a great white shark and a pelican.
I think I'm the shark, but okay.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, we're making a joke, but it's actually a necessary skill. The idea here is that like a great white shark just jumps right in and attacks like crazy and just bites as big a bite as they possibly can. And sometimes in life, we actually have to have the ability to just rudely, straightforward interrupt with someone for whatever reason. Maybe they're sabotaging something. Maybe they're taking things in a really legitimately dangerous direction, or maybe they're just wrong and they need to be corrected quickly and forcefully. Whatever the thing might be. Now, to be clear, this is like hopefully 3%, 5% of your professional communication. But sometimes you need to have the ability to say, like, you're wrong. Let me stop you right there. Those sorts of things. But most of the rest of the time, you're not trying to interrupt in that sort of way. You're trying to interrupt in such a way that everyone sees you coming, that there's a progression through this, and that you then enter the conversation in as smooth a way as possible. So the reason we think of a pelican is because you see a pelican flapping their wings from a long way away. They see them approaching the water. They make contact with the water, and even though they're a big, heavy bird, very quickly, the water is smooth as they just paddle right along the surface of the water. So what that looks like from a conversational standpoint is actually making your interjections have 3 distinct phases. So the first one is you name that you're about to do it. So everyone hears the warning. And we always do this in conversation. So it's not as though I'm inventing this. I'm just reminding you of what you know how to do. That sounds like, let me add something here. Or let me jump in briefly. Or let me interject. So you're actually naming the behavior you're about to do.
That's a good idea.
The important thing is you have to give context. So that's a because. That's why you're doing it. Because this is relevant to next week's meeting. Because you make a great point that really is applicable to the entire topic. Whatever it is, you give the why. So people don't just think you're randomly doing something. They understand your rationale for doing so. And then the third step is that you build on it with a positive. Melissa makes a great point. I want to make sure that I want to piggyback on the smart thing Melissa mentioned about such and such. So the person gets this gentle compliment. So the interjection is a bit more palatable.
That's brilliant. I love that. That's really, really good. Another topic I wanted to cover is I'm finding a lot of my candidates, not surprisingly, are somewhat new to communicating over VC remotely. And I think a lot of them, and you've mentioned this in your webinars, get very stiff and formal, and they see this kind of like this wall between them and the person they're communicating with. So they're not bringing themselves forward and not being natural. Are there tips that you share that help somebody to feel like, pretend like this person's in the room? That's what I've been telling my candidates. Try to like get over the fact that this is a veil between you and the person you're communicating with. Pretend they're in the room, turn off all your distractions, focus on what you're doing, and be more of your real self.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything else you would add to that that could help people just be more comfortable and act as though they're in the room where you get all the nuances of the in-person kind of issues when you're face-to-face.
Sure. I do have some ideas. I mean, if you had to boil every single thing I do as a coach down to one basic idea, it's this, that I try to help people find behaviors that they can do. Not just mindsets, but behaviors. So what you just said, like be comfortable, be yourself, be relaxed, those are all the goals. You're right. That is what everyone wants. But the challenge is people may not know how to achieve that. So the question is, what are the behaviors that help you do that very thing? And there's a few that I'll bring to the audience's attention. One of the biggest things is just get as comfortable as you can doing this. So if you're someone who doesn't love video conference, force yourself right now to call your friends via video conference. Because what you want to begin to do is have a positive association with this interface. Number two is put something right on your computer that makes you really happy. I actually like to even use, this is going to seem very silly, but you get the reason why. I like to use a piece of gum wrapper. And so you actually put that right next to the camera. So what is it doing? Well, it's a shiny little object, first of all, and our eyes like to go to shiny objects. But also, it's a piece of gum. So you tend to already open your mouth a little bit, think about chewing it. If you have a positive association with that, it helps remind you like, oh yeah, I can be human. I don't need to be like stiff video person right now. But you don't have to use that. Use a picture. Use a little puffy sticker.
You want to see mine?
Yeah, let's see yours. What is yours?
Mine is a little happy face. Oh, where is it? Hold on. Here it is.
Right. Oh, perfect. So there you go. Little happy face is exactly.
I picked that up from your webinar, your first webinar, and so I put my little smiley face up there.
There you go. Final thought I'll add about that is that you can feel free to narrate and be transparent with what's happening in the room. So I like to talk to people that if you're going to look off screen to do something, you can actually tell the person what you're doing. I'm just going to grab a note right here and write this down because what you said is really relevant. Now, even just the comfort of like, oh yeah, that person has paper. That's right. I know paper. Paper's a thing. And also naming what I'm doing and showing the comfort I have with this physical space. It tends to put you at ease, meaning the person who's talking, and also tends to put your audience at ease.
Yep. It's interesting you say that about naming what you're doing because I have two monitors in my home office and oftentimes I'll have a resume for somebody up on the right monitor, but I'm doing the video right here. And if I'm looking over here, I never want them to think, oh, I'm actually doing emails over here and totally ignoring you. That's not nice. So I immediately say at the beginning, by the way, I'm looking over here because your resume is up on my second monitor. So don't think I'm ignoring you. Yeah. And it's been well received. And I hadn't thought it really does make you feel more comfortable in your environment.
Yeah.
Another thought I had for you was, so this recent pitch that we did, we had 3 individuals from our side and we had 2 people we were pitching to. And I did the narration at the beginning to kind of set the stage, if you will, for what we were going to say. And we had talked in advance of who from my team was going to be handling different topics. I ended up doing more of the talking throughout the whole pitch. I think because I started off as the lead. It's really important for me, as it is, I'm sure, for a lot of our clients, to make sure everybody seems elevated from your team and everybody shows their expertise and their knowledge base, because it can't be about me, at least for Jamesbeck, it's about the team. And I was really trying to set my colleagues up for opportunity to talk and show their expertise. I feel like I didn't do that as well as maybe I could have, or they were reluctant to kind of jump in to talk, not to talk over people. I don't know if you have any suggestions around that.
So a couple of thoughts on this. One, this is back to like really dumb advice, but the question is not, do you know the advice? The question is, do you do the actual advice? Preparation and planning, there is no substitute for that. And so you can feel quite free to say to people like, I want you to handle this portion. When this question comes up, because I know it will, I'm going to throw that moment to you. I'd like you to take that on. Or even better, give them the power. I want to make sure that we really show you in a positive way in this meeting what particular section or portion do you really feel great about and you would love to add your 2 cents. So they actually take some ownership of making that decision, and obviously they have a very vested interest in which part they feel strongly about. So that's some of the things you can do. Now, beyond those steps of preparing and planning, you also can take a very active role in making sure you're throwing focus and attention to different people. But there's a key rule with this, which is you can't throw your team under the bus. So you have to let them know you're going to do it, and then you got to talk. for a little while, and then you hand it off to them. So what that looks like is, as opposed to like, that's a great question, Melissa. That sounds
Thanks a
like
lot, Michael.
exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Then it's like, that's a great question. Melissa on the team has done a bunch of work on this. So in a minute, not right now, in a minute, I'm going to let her respond too. And I know she has some thoughts to share. But before I do that, I do want to get my 2 cents on the subject, which is blah, 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 blah. Melissa, what would you add to that? So your wheels can be feverishly turning, figuring out what you want to say.
To hop onto that point, you know, it's a different dynamic when you're communicating over VC as part of a team, because when you see some people, when you're in person for a pitch, you can read body language and you can see if somebody's getting bored or if they're excited and they're leaning forward, and you actually have your teammates next to you, which gives you strength and confidence. And you don't feel like the onus is completely on you to run the meeting. It's a very different dynamic when you're doing a VC with multiple people. And the way the actual software works is you kind of come to the foreground when you're speaking, and you feel more like you're on a pedestal, like you're the president and you've got to be perfect in everything you do. And you don't have your teammates sitting right next to you there supporting you. So how do you overcome that challenge or that fear or that concern?
Yeah. Some of them you can't. You can't read people's body language as clearly in VC as you can in real life. So just accept that, really, is the first part of it. The second is that zooming in effect, where you also get a larger size of real estate than the rest of folks, to the extent that you can, I want you to make friends with that, because it might not feel like it, but it is helping you for sure. Just even if you are a student of cinema, just notice how when you watch a close-up, I mean, there's a reason why in Hollywood, when they want to really let you into a character's inner life, they do the whole thing in close-up. They don't do a wide body shot from way far away. So it is actually helping you. It might feel like it's zooming in and everything is noticeable in a negative way. It's not. It's actually positioning you and lifting you up. So to the extent you can make friends with that, do so. The other thing is that VC and both audio and video interfaces, it calls on us to be much better at the beginnings and the endings of what we say. And what I mean by that is you can really help all of your team, but also your clients and your customers, by naming what you're going to do before it. So that sounds like bookending things a little bit. Meaning like, I want to make 3 points about this, or I want to jump in actually on execution, or I want to make sure we have time to talk about how we're going to pivot. So let's move to that now. So you're giving people a very clear preview of where you're going. It helps them feel some safety that there's actually some structure and format to what you're talking about. And the same is true at the end of your comments as well. When you get to the finish of whatever you're saying, be very mindful of how you hand things back to the rest of the group. So what I mean by that is that open-ended questions that are just very amorphous, or also closed-ended questions that are almost rhetorical, they're not so useful. So here's an example of both. Open-ended amorphous questions are like this. How does that sound to everyone? And everyone's like, yeah, or no, or this, or just like tuned out, right? So those amorphous open-ended questions, they're not your friend. Skip those. Also, closed-ended questions that are basically just assuming agreement or asking for something but not legitimately asking for it are not so useful either. The famous one of that is, are there any questions? And everyone's like, no. Or if they were going to have a question, you'd still be better off framing it differently anyway. So at the end of whatever you're sharing, you want to be very clear about that as well. And now I'll hand this back off, particularly to those of you in the New York office. What are your thoughts on such and such? So you give a very clear teeing up of things at the beginning and the end. And that will help throw the focus to these various squares so we have a sense of format and structure about who's going to speak next or who's going to take the stage next.
Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. I cannot thank you enough. I know all of our clients will be really appreciative to kind of get these insights as we're all trying to, tackle the new norm in a successful, positive, and productive way. So this has been wonderful. Well, it's so great to spend time with you. I appreciate it. You're very kind to do the video. Hopefully, if we have other topics that are interesting, we can grab you again. And stay safe and healthy and be well.
I will. You do the same.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.